Our speaker this evening is David Turner. And David Turner has been with us. This is not his first visit with the Rhinebeck Historical Society. I was very fortunate to run into him in a situation where he and I were competing and I lost, but he very generously shared the album that he outbid me on at an auction quite a few years ago. In fact, allowed us to use all those images in our archives at the Historical Society. That was my first encounter. We were able to con him into doing a program for us on historic postcards of northern Dutchess County. That was back in September, 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, September 25th, 2020. And then we got him to come back again to talk about the hamlets that he hadn't covered, many of them in the southern half of the county, in 2021 in February. So he's overdue for another visit, I think. And, you know, David Turner has been collecting postcards since the age of 12 and lives down there in Beacon. And there are a few other distractions in Beacon, but somehow he stays focused, I believe the number is up to 12,000 of your postcards have been posted on eBay. You know, it's not easy in this day and age when you post something and you have people copy it and steal it from you and reproduce it and charge money for it. When you have something really valuable, that's got to be very frustrating as a collector and dealer of that kind of material. But David has been very generous with all of us. He's recently become a board member of the Dutchess County Historical Society. And, you know, that organization under Bill Jeffway's leadership has been doing wonderful things. David, we are delighted to have you here this evening. He's going to be talking about the late 19th century in Dutchess County with a focus on the industrialization in the county. And focusing on some unusual collections of postcards. And actually, that's not exactly the correct word, but I'm going to let David explain that rather than I, because I would likely to get it wrong. David, so happy to have you with us. The program is yours. Go for it.
Hello, everyone. David Turner. As Mike was saying, I've been collecting for a long time since I was a young kid. Started with old postcards of the area, but now I am moved on to all photography, early photography, 1850s to about the 1930s. And I stumbled across things called stereo views, maybe about 15, 16 years ago. Always would find one or two around. And since then, I've amassed, you know, a collection of over 1,000 images of the Hudson Valley dating from the 1860s to about the 1880s. Recently bought a nice collection from a man by the name of James Becker in Walden, New York. He'd been collecting in the 70s and 80s, so a little bit before I had started collecting. And I was able to purchase them from him. And a lot of these images were items that he had collected over his lifetime. So a lot of these haven't been seen for the past 50 years or so. And I'm really excited to share some of this for you. So let me share my screen. Give me a minute here. Also, please bear with me. I am fighting a pretty bad cold. So if I sound a little bit gravelly or I mute myself to cough, I apologize. So Dutchess County, a photographic tour of the county life between the 1860 and 1880. About 100 different stereo views in this presentation. You might ask, what is a stereo view? And I just wanted to talk about two things, stereo views and CDVs. We'll start with the CDV. This is actually called a carte de visite, which is a French term. It was a new style of almost a portrait photography using album paper instead of printing these on glass or silver plate. This was the first way that people were able to print onto photographic paper. It was introduced in Paris by André Adolphe Eugene Desderay, and it was produced in 1854. And as I said, most of these were images of people, portraits to send to your family. They're very small. They're about 3.5 by 2 inches. And they were about the same size as a calling card. So you can give this to someone saying, hey, I'm a salesman. Please, here's my address on the back. Here's a picture of him on the front. But sometimes you can find these CDVs that show buildings or landscapes. And these are the hardest ones to find. I only have about 5 or 6 of Dutchess County. And I'll be showing some of these in this presentation. The other thing are stereo views. These were first invented in 1838 by Charles Wheatstone. And he did this by using drawings, taking at slightly different perspectives. He realized that if you could put it in these different perspectives and being looked at by your different eyes, your right and left eye, that would give it a 3D effect. David Webster took this and created his own system to do this with photographs. He would take 2 CDV images, put them side by side of each other. Of course, they would be in slightly different perspective. So when you looked through one of his viewers, it would give a 3D illusion to it. And taking it from drawings to photography, it really opened it up to a new audience. And by the 1860s, it had reached New York City. So you see a lot of images of the creation of Central Park. That was a big event in the 1860s. And by the 1870s, it really had spread across the country. So a lot of the images that I have here to be showing you will be around the 1870s, 1880s. So here is an example of a CDV. As I said, they're about 3 inches by 2 inches. So very, very small, but you can fit a lot of detail in those images. This is a view of the A. Moore store at 157 Main Street in Poughkeepsie. He was a shoe dealer. So if you look closely here, you can see, let me get my red point here. You can see the little trunks that are being held up here on the roof. He has a sign down the middle, and all of these crates here are filled with shoes. So just to show his vast supply and variety of different things that he sold. So this was an advertising card. He would have given it being, hey, come down to my store. We have the best selection of shoes. So as I said, a lot of these were used for portrait photography. It's unusual to find an advertising card, and most of these date from the 1840s to about the 1870s. This is a stereo view. You can see it's 2 images taken right next to each other. Slightly different perspective. You can see that the building on the left is tilting a little bit to the left. This one is a little bit more straight. So these different perspectives would allow you to see in a 3D version when used in a stereo viewer, which I can show you at the end of the presentation. Most of them were done in the 1850s to 1900s. By the late 1900s, postcards had really taken over. So this became more of a novelty. Just to show you what the image is of, this is the Century plant at Montgomery Place. I believe that is up in northern Dutchess County. This was a plant that was planted before the Revolutionary War. And by this time in the 1870s, it had reached its, I guess, century status, and it began to bloom. So there are over 4,000 little tiny flowers on top of this plant. It's part of the agave family. I think it's also part of the asparagus family, oddly enough. It's very rare for them to survive this long, and it was passed down from generation to generation. Of course, they were a very wealthy family. You can see their beautiful greenhouse in the background. A wealthy family that would have gardeners that would be able to prune and take care of these plants and really have the wealth to sustain a large garden like this. It's another image of Rhinebeck of a house. I don't have many images, stereo views of Rhinebeck. It really depended on who the photographer was in the area, if they were creating stereo views. At this time, there really weren't many photographers around. The major ones were located down in Newburgh, Beacon, and Poughkeepsie. So just having any sort of stereo view of your village is actually pretty rare. This is the advertisement on the back. Jay Coombe, he was the photographer in Rhinebeck. Here you can see he sells stereoscopes and views, oval and square frames, black walnut and rustic frames, Tinto photographs and shadow pictures. So this was his advertising piece to say, hey, I'll come out to your house and I'll take a stereo view of it. It was mostly for the more wealthy people, as it was a pretty big expense to have a photograph taken at the time. So stereo views and CDVs of Dutchess County. There's only a handful of photographers in the entire county, so they're very hard to find. There's some national photographers like Anthony that came up the Hudson River and took photographs of some of the river towns. But for the most part, there were local photographers, as I said, mostly focused in the big cities. Most of the stereo views that I found are of the western part of the county, centering in the villages. Not so much I found in the eastern part, although I do show some of Central Dutchess and Eastern Dutchess that I've come across. And most of the images fit into a few categories, either the Hudson River estates, people wealthy enough to have their estate photographed, education, which was very big in Dutchess County at the time, is even today, village life. So just different pastoral scenes of your village, some showing buildings, but mostly people and their daily life, and industry. And that's a big one that was changing in Dutchess County at the time. The first industrial revolution had already happened in the 1820s, 1830s, centered more around in New England. You can think of Fall River, Massachusetts, and all the areas around Boston that were really these large mills. And by the time the 1860s, 1870s, this had spread across the rest of the country, and it really was coming into the Hudson Valley, changing a lot of these small mills into larger factories and centering more along the riverfronts. So let's get into some images. I'm going to start with Hudson River Estates. This is the Tioronda Estate in Fishkill Landing. It was built for Joseph Howland in the 1850s and designed by Frederick Clark Withers, who was a very famous architect of the time. He was very well known for his large gardens on the property. He would take trees from Japan and different species from Europe and bring it into his garden. I believe some of these trees still stand today and on the grounds. The house still stands. It is after his death, the estate was used as a gateway for the city youth called University Settlement. And in 1915, it became the first privately run psychiatric hospital called the Craig House. And that would continue into the 1990s. In 1999, it was left vacant. It's been vacant for many years now, still is today, but was recently purchased by Mirabeau Hotel, which I believe is there in Rhinebeck with you guys. So Mirabeau has purchased the property and has large plans to completely refurbish the house and redo the grounds. So everyone in Beacon is pretty excited about that one of these houses is being saved. This is a picture of his grounds. I have a lot of stereo views of different plants on his property. None of them are identified, so a lot of them just look like hedgerows and trees. But this was an interesting view of his treehouse that he had on the property. As you can see, it's a spiral staircase around this old tree to your almost Captain Spy Point looking down the Hudson River. Just a cool Victorian estate amenity. Just down the street was the Woodenheath Mansion. This was purchased in 1840 by Henry Winthrop Sargent and his wife, Caroline Olmsted. It was designed by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted, who are very big architecture designers and landscape designers at the time. Gardeners were designed by Sargent himself with the help of Andrew Jackson Downing. It was once called the most artistic 20-acre place in America. This is how focused a lot of these gentlemen farmers were at the time to have the most beautiful estate on the Hudson River. It was passed down to his son Winthrop Sargent and his wife Amy in 1882. So this is just a different view of the house. You can see the beautiful ivy that's going up the side of it here. This is his son, Winthrop Sargent, and his wife, Amy, sitting in front of what looks like one of the large greenhouses. You can see some of the plants on the inside. You can see the cactuses right here on these early Oriental garden seats with different garden statuary and planters everywhere. I can imagine she's very hot as she's wearing a parasol, but she's also wearing what seems about 20 pounds of black fabric. So I'm sure that is quite hot. Winthrop, the father, died in 1960. Winthrop Sargent would pass away in 1882, and he would be passed down to these two children. These are the gardens themselves. You can see the topiary and the palm plant here. So plants from a little bit of everywhere to showcase the gardens. This is a view in their horse and carriage. You can see Henry Winthrop Sargent right over here on the far right. He's wearing the top hat right next to the carriage. His wife Caroline is sitting in the carriage. His son and daughter-in-law are at the head. You can see his fancily dressed coachman holding the 4 team horses on his carriage. As I said, that Henry Winthrop would pass away in 1882, and it would pass down to his son and daughter-in-law. After they passed in 1916 and 1918, respectively, it was purchased by the Craig House, which, as we just saw before, was in the Tyrunda estate. It was burned in a controlled fire in 1954 after the Craig House downsized their property. Pretty sure this place was in dire need of repair, and having an estate of this size was quite an expense. So sadly, it no longer stands. Moving on to the Van Vliet House in Fishkill Landing. Those two estates were in the more Manawan section of town. This is Fishkill Landing down by the river. This is an early Dutch colonial house. You can see it's made out of stone, and the second floor being made out of wood. This beautiful tree right out front. This area over here on the left was most likely the kitchen. The living quarters over here on the right. It was built in the mid-1700s on West Main Street. This would be West Main Street right next to it. If you've been to Beacon now, this is not what it looks like. Beautiful stone walls, though. Margaret Fuller, the first woman reporter for the New York Tribune, wrote Women in the 19th Century at the Van Vliet House in the fall of 1844. And that was really one of the earliest feminist manifestos talking about the role of women and how it should change. But beautiful colonial house that wouldn't last much longer with the ever-expanding city of Beacon. Moving further up the river, we're going to get to the Eastman Mansion. This is Harvey Gridley Eastman Estate, who was on South Avenue and Montgomery Street, close to exactly where Eastman Park is today. It was built in the 1860s for Mr. Eastman, who was the founder and president of the Eastman Business College, which we'll actually see a few views of later. He purchased 27 acres next to his estate to establish Eastman Park and Eastman Terrace. This is his mansion himself. You can see some young people playing croquet, which is a very popular outside game at the time. This is the view of Eastman Park. This is the little bandstand that inside the fountain. In the background, you can see Eastman Terrace, which was a set of 10 5-story townhouses. It was supposed to be the most impressive townhouses between New York City and Albany. Each was customized to the owner, so it was a very fashionable place to live. Although it wasn't very successful, he had early plans of making 24 of these 5-story townhouses, but people at the time not really wanting to live right next door to your neighbor or share a wall, it was much easier to move to Garfield Place or Academy Street and build your home there and have a little bit more privacy. So at the time it was known as Eastman's Folly, although these apartments do still stand on Montgomery Street below Garfield Place today. I believe they've been all cut up into apartments, although there might be one that is still a townhouse. This is a close-up of those Eastman Terrace. You can see it's a very beautiful Victorian building. Some of the ornamentation here on top no longer exists, but you can drive right by it if you're driving down Market Street. Moving on to the Henry Livingston Mansion. This is a view of it in about the 1860s. It was built for Henry Vanderburg in the 1740s. It was the first large estate built in Poughkeepsie. Henry Livingston purchased the property after marrying his wife in the 1850s, and the Livingstons became one of the largest landowners in Poughkeepsie at the time, owning a large chunk of the south side of Poughkeepsie. It stayed in the Livingston families until about the 1870s. That's about this time this photograph was taken. The property was sold to the Phoenix Horseshoe Company as it was really close to the river. So a factory kind of built itself around the property, including the railroad that would be only 30 or 40 feet away from the house itself. It was torn down in 1910. It was a shame that we lost this beautiful colonial house, this being the older part on the right. You can see only part of the large side of the mansion over here on the left. But beautiful large windows. You can see this little circular window that let light in from the side. Beautiful old locust trees in front of it as well. This is another stereo view that was listed as the Livingston House. I'm not sure if this is taken from the other direction or it's a different Livingston than the one I showed in the previous, but it's just another interesting Dutch colonial house that was here in Poughkeepsie. First floor was all the living quarters. You can see there's one small gable window here for probably some sleeping quarters upstairs. We're moving further up the river. Here we are in Statsburg in the town of Hyde Park. This is the Locust's house, originally built for Henry Blockhurst Livingston, a Revolutionary War officer and Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, and he named his estate the Locusts. It was later purchased by William Brown Dinsmore and the Dinsmore family, who kept the house for a few years before tearing it down and replacing it. He kept the name Locust. So just want to show you a close-up here of the people sitting in the lawn. These are probably the Dinsmores here, Mr. Dinsmore and his wife. And you can see the girls over here are reading and plenty of bored young boys lounging around the estate. They would replace this stone mansion with this view. This is an old postcard from about 1900. This shows the back of the Dinsmore, the Locusts. So you can see they built this giant wood Victorian house, much more impressive than the kind of dark enclosed stone house that they had before, allowing in lots of light, plenty of porches to really take advantage of that Hudson River view. This would also be torn down. As you can imagine, having a large wood house of this size was difficult to heat, difficult to maintain. So in the 1930s, the family replaced it with this house, a crescent-shaped home, more of an Art Deco style at the time. This is a view taken at the pool. It is currently up for rent for your wedding, if you're interested, but that will set you back about $70,000 to have it at this estate. This is located right next to Mills Mansion. So moving on from the estates to education, this was a popular topic for stereo views, showing how we take care of our young people in our community, something to be proud of. This is St. Stephen's College in 1860. It was established by John and Margaret Johnston Bard in association with leaders of the Episcopal Church in the city. For its first 60 years, St. Stephen's offered young men a classical curriculum in preparation for their entrance into the seminary. So a religious education for the most part. In 1919, the college moved towards a more secular education, which included the arts. And in 1934, the college was renamed Bard College in honor of its founders, and it also included their large estate on the property. So today, of course, this is Bard College, which is nationally renowned. And I just want to show you a close-up here. You can see some of the graduates with their square hats in the center of the image, but which I thought was very interesting, other than the man playing his guitar, was these gentlemen over here on the left. You can see that they're all holding baseball bats. So this is an early view of some baseball players at the school. Now, baseball was only really invented, I believe, in the early 1870s. So this is one of the earliest photographs that you find on these stereo views of people playing baseball or dressed up to play baseball. And these are some of the most valuable stereo views you can find, having these early images of the sport. Moving on to the Christian Bible Institute in Stanfordville. It was established in 1872 to give men an education to pursue a career in the clergy. It was built on 60 acres in the heart of the hamlet of Stanfordville. Reverend Austin Craig appointed as president when it first started. I believe that in the middle is Austin Craig. With dwindling enrollment, classes moved to Defiance College in Northwest Ohio, just south of Toledo. and it later became the Henry Hudson School before it was destroyed by a fire in 1944. And I really like, it took me a long time to identify this photograph, as it is just a view of the porch. But since seeing another one of the broader school, I was able to identify this as the Christian Bible Institute. But here's a close-up of the men sitting on the porch. What really interests me is everyone seems to be looking in a slightly different spot. Somebody's looking down, some people looking over to the left, some to the right, except for the person right in the middle who seems to just stare down the camera in a very imposing stare. But you can see so much detail in this photograph, including the different dimensions to the door. You can see that the inside of this man's hat has some newspaper print and even the ball over here on the left. It's just a very interesting photograph and very well taken. Moving on to Vassar College. This was established by Matthew Vassar in 1861. This is one of the earliest views you'll find of Vassar College. This is the main building. It was also the building where the women would stay as well, have their classes, all kind of encompassed into this one building. You can see the area in the foreground looks like still farmland with a little bit of snow on the ground. It'd be the same weather as we're having now. Again, it was established by Matthew Vassar in 1861, who made his fortune as a beer brewer. He offered young women a liberal arts education equal to that of the best of men's colleges of the day, which is surprisingly a very revolutionary idea for the era. Instead of sending your daughter off to a finishing school to learn how to interact in polite society, this gave her more of a practical education with, I believe, Sister Ivy School. I believe it might have been Yale was the sister school of Vassar College. The first person appointed to the Vassar faculty was the astronomer Maria Mitchell in 1865. I found this interesting because, oops, just show you this one image right here. This is Vassar Lake in the foreground. You can see the women enjoying a nice, very cold rowboat ride. This would be Raymond Avenue today, where you can see these rock walls. And of course, Vassar College over here, which is very stark, is a very large institution, one of the largest buildings in Poughkeepsie at the time. As you can see, none of the libraries or dormitories have been built yet. But back to Maria Mitchell, was the first faculty member that was hired for Vassar College. And Matthew Vassar built her a beautiful observatory here on the grounds. You can see her standing by the telescope. And she discovered a comet in the 1850s, which gave her a lot of press in England at the time where she lived. And it became famous. She wrote a book about it and became worldwide known for her astronomy work. So it was very lucky for Matthew Vassar to entice her to come over to Vassar College to teach for the women there. Just a beautiful building as well. It was one of only really that large building for Vassar College. This observatory and Matthew Vassar's museum were really the first buildings built on the Vassar property. And just another image. This is looking from the entrance of Vassar College down Raymond Avenue. So this would be looking, I want to say north on Raymond Avenue towards the city of Poughkeepsie. I love these giant trees here that are almost built into the road. You can see the gap here between the rock wall, and these look like at least 150 years old. So if you think about this photograph being taken in the 1870s, 100 years, 150 years before that, this would have been planted maybe in the 1720s. And it's just amazing to look at some of these things and realize the passage of time when you see something so old in an old photograph that it could be, it could have been here before people had even settled the area. Moving on to the Eastman National Business College. Now remember, we saw Eastman's mansion and we saw his park and his beautiful townhouses that he built. Well, this is how he made his money, establishing the Eastman National Business College. Established in 1859 again by Harvey G. Eastman. At its height of success, the school was one of the largest commercial colleges in the United States. Students gained practical experience in business arts by actually performing the tasks that would be expected of them in their working careers. And that was also a novel approach at the time. So you can see a lot of innovation and a lot of new ideas coming out of Dutchess County. It closed its doors on June 10th, 1931. I assume that the Great Depression or the drop in the stock market really hurt these businesses hard. Oh, I just wanted to point out that this was located on Mill Street in Poughkeepsie. Here's a view of the inside, where they would have gotten their practical experience in all of these different things for business life. Here's a close-up of that scene. You can see over here is the post office, so you can work as a postmaster. Over here was the pay office, so if you're working in a factory or a different type of large business, this is where you can do all the bookkeeping. Here's also the bookkeepers. This was a very important job to make sure that your business is profitable and you're not losing money. This was a very highly paid job at the time. You would have a team of people working on your books for a large company. And today, most of that can be done on Excel spreadsheets. So just showing the progress of the time. Over here is the real estate offices. So just all these different practical ways to really learn about the business you want to go into with your own hands. Here's a view of the graduating class in the 1870s. You can see how many people actually went to this school. It's amazing. I don't know where they housed all of these people. I don't think they all lived in Poughkeepsie at the time, or else there's a lot of business people in Poughkeepsie. But you can see them just crawling out of the windows and hanging onto the second story there. Very interesting image. Here's a close-up of it. See everybody just kind of daring themselves, sitting on these ledges and on top of the pinnacles here. It's a nice image, and people hanging out of all the windows. You can see the only lone woman here, maybe the daughter of this man over here. Moving on, this is the Riverview Academy of Poughkeepsie. It opened in 1867 after the closing of the Collegiate School on College Hill. It was designed by J.A. Wood, who is credited with the design of Vassar College and Vassar Institute. It gave men a well-rounded education in science and the arts with a grounding in military tactics and discipline. It was said that you weren't allowed to drink, you weren't allowed to smoke, you weren't allowed to chew tobacco, you weren't allowed to fight, you weren't allowed to swear. So it was a very, very strict school for maybe children that were a little bit unruly. Closed in 1921 after years of financial issues. The building itself was declared unsafe and was razed in 1965. So this is an image which I believe is taken from Eastman Park, looking towards the river. This is a view looking from what would today be, I believe, Route 9, looking up towards Lincoln Park. And that's where the school is located. If you're ever doing the soccer field on Lincoln Park, that's where this building used to stand. Pretty amazing that this is a view of Poughkeepsie with all the trees and what seems like meandering streets through an early forest. Here are the cadets. You can see there are a lot of very young men here. Again, everyone is kind of looking in a different direction. I love that type of photography. Only a couple of these guys over here on the bottom right seem to be clocking the photographer himself. You can see these are probably the headmasters and teachers over here in the middle with their large top hats, and some of the upperclassmen over here on the left. The photograph was taken by G.W. Patch, who's a very famous photographer in New York City and up to about West Point. He took a lot of really great photographs of West Point. And here you can see he's advertising his Long Branch and Ocean Grove, New Jersey photo studio. Moving on to village life, taking you away from some of these estates and education to show you how the common man lived. This is images of Red Hook. Both of these, I believe, are taken on what is now Route 9 or Broadway. You can see the boys over here on the left are enjoying a goat-pulled cart. I must have caught the photographer's eye as he was walking with his camera equipment to take this snap. You can see the little boy over here sitting on the ground, which is a very common thing to see in a lot of these photographs, is that people sat on the ground much more often than they do today. And his friend here sitting in this early wagon. You can note back here the staircase that seems to go to nowhere. This is for you to enter your stagecoach or to hop onto your horse. The pole right here is to tie your horse up in front of your home. The view on the right is again Broadway. I believe this is looking north up what is now Route 9 in Red Hook. You can see the early rock walls here. The gentleman standing in the middle of the road. Get a close-up of that image. A little bit blurry, but what's interesting is over here, the two people that are sitting on the rock wall are actually painting the scene across the street from them, which is a very interesting thing. I would love to see what they were painting, or if it's hanging anywhere today. Interesting view up the road here, tree lined, that there is a staircase that will take you into this farming field over here. Just different little tiny details that of things that you wouldn't think would exist, or you wouldn't see a need for. Again, another view of Red Hook. This lake, I believe, is right behind the octagonal library in Red Hook. I think it's covered in scum today, and it doesn't really look this beautiful. You can see the old mill in the background, and these men enjoying a fishing trip, while this family is just enjoying a nice row on this pastoral lake. Here's a close-up of the groups. You can see the men with their fancy hats and dressed with ties and suspenders, and the family back here, just rowing away, hoping that none of these little kids fall into the water. Moving on, let me go back to this old one. You can see this little shack over here at the center of the photograph. That is what this is. It's most likely just a little clubhouse for these men to come during their fishing trips. You can see their long poles here for their fishing poles, a couple of nets. On the inside, that looks like they're cooking up some dinner, or maybe some of their fish that they caught. Nice hammock that this man is relaxing on. This is just a close-up of, again, men sitting on the ground, which today I'm sure they would be sitting in camping chairs. But just want to give you a view of the inside of this, peek inside of this little shack here to see the cups and a couple of the plates here on the table. It's another view from Red Hook. I was very lucky to get this group of Red Hook stereo views. As I said, the smaller the town, the harder it is to find these images. And Red Hook, luckily, I was able to find this nice batch of images. This is a farming scene taken at one of the farms outside of the village. You can see this man has what looks like a reaper here. And his horse couldn't stay still for the photograph. It's a really interesting farming scene that kind of the rudimentary tools that they had being pulled by these horses, and such a difference between combines you see today that can almost run themselves with satellites. So it's just a really interesting glimpse into the back into what farming life used to be. This is the National Bank building. This is on Broadway near the center of the village. Today, this is the Red Hook Police Department. I didn't know that this building was this old, from the 1870s, until I found this stereo view. You can see only a couple of the windows are open. Everything else seems to be closed up. The bank must have only really been using this front of the building. But interesting to see that this building still stands. It's in great condition too. The police department really takes care of it, and looks just as good as this old photograph. Moving on to the center of the village, this is the Gedney House Hotel. There's the general store was on the first floor, and the hotel rooms were up here on the second. This is probably very close to when this building was built. Again, right here on Broadway. This building still stands on the corner of in Red Hook today. Looks very much similar, painted a beautiful red. It's just cool to see it 150 years ago when it was first built. Moving on to Rhinebeck, this is one of the houses in the village. This is another Coombe photograph. You can see the woman here in her very long dress, the man with his long jacket and top hat. It's just really interesting to see photographs of this time. It's just the fashion had changed so much, but still you can kind of feel a little bit of the colonial ways that were still being held on to. And we're really in this transition period between the colonial period of Dutchess County and more modern turn of the 20th century attire. Really beautiful house. I believe I posted this to the Rhinebeck page, and somebody said they knew it still stood. I'm not sure myself, and maybe Mike Frazier or any of you others in the Rhinebeck Historical Study can help me firmly identify this house. Beautiful fence, beautiful porch, decorations as well. Here's the Rhinebeck Hotel, which is now the Beekman Arms. This is the earliest photograph I've ever found of the Beekman Arms, most likely taken in the early 1870s. It's a colonial stopping point, of course, on the old Albany Post Road. It's one of the earliest buildings in Rhinebeck. It's amazing that it still stands today. You can go into the old tavern and really get a feel of what a colonial building at the time would have felt like. You can see that it hasn't been, of course, what it looks like today. This second story porch was removed and they made a very long, tall colonnade, I believe in the 1920s or early 30s. So it changes the look of the hotel. This is a closer example of how the hotel looked, in the early 1800s. You can see in the middle here, right on the left of the middle of the street, this is a horse trough for traveling horses that are going up the Albany Post Road. A lot of the villages supplied this for travelers so that the horse can rest, get a drink on their way through town. Just a really great image of the Beekman Arms. Moving on to the city of Poughkeepsie, many of the photographs that I actually got of Poughkeepsie in the stereo view collection kind of showed, I was a little surprised to show not the front of buildings, but kind of this rooftop view showing the backs of buildings and gardens. You can see this house right in front of us. It looks like it's an old colonial house with all these kind of wacky additions built onto it. It's an interesting perspective of the city of Poughkeepsie at the time, taken most likely right across the street on somebody else's roof. You can see the nice Dutch style building over here, which no longer stands in Poughkeepsie, and what looks like a very Greek revival building right here. This might be Union Street. Just a cool view of of Poughkeepsie. That's why would you take this image? But I'm happy that they did. It's just an interesting view. It's another view that kind of shows the rooftops of Poughkeepsie. I haven't been exactly able to locate exactly where this photograph was taken, and it's hard for me to recognize, a lot of these churches here as well, but I assume this is somewhere near downtown. I don't see College Hill, so I assume this is taken from the south side of Poughkeepsie, looking towards downtown. What really caught my eye was this beautiful gabled roof here, another early colonial house. You can see the little windows here, and on the house next door, this gigantic chimney, big enough for Santa Claus to fit down for sure. Just another interesting view showing the rooftops of Poughkeepsie, showing it growing, showing how populated it was. Moving on to just kind of more village life. This is the May Day celebration. This is the May pole. Now, a boy and girl would each be given a ribbon, usually of a different color. The younger children would be closer to the center. The older children would be centered or, be on the outside of the circle. And they would walk around until it was all tied up. So this is a pair of stereo views that shows the before and after of the celebration. This was kind of just, thank God we survived winter, warm weather is coming, let's celebrate. So they would have this maypole, thing for the children, and then there would be a big celebration in the park. What I really like about this, let me go back to the other image. You don't really notice it here, but you see the boys that are hanging out in these trees. There's a boy right here, and all the way on the left, here's a boy holding his hat in the tree. If you go to the next image, you get a little bit closer. See, now the boy's hanging out with his hat. There's another one next to him. A bunch of other boys hanging out in these trees. Maybe a little bit jealous that they weren't invited to participate, but they're there for the celebration. Here's a view down Main Street in Poughkeepsie. This is probably a little bit later, about 1880s or closer to that time. I'll give you a close-up of some of these storefronts. You can see the storefronts along top. I advertise it on the second floor. These might be where the furniture is stored. different types of departments within this store right here. You can see the cobblestone streets and all of the stuff that is along the sidewalk. But really what catches me is all the telegraph lines that are just lining the side of Poughkeepsie Main Street, that it really just is almost surprising to see. And I'm sure it was easy to ignore as much as we do telephone lines today, but a little bit jarring seeing all of the wires everywhere. This is the interior of the Crosby store on Main Street in Poughkeepsie. This was in the Kirchner building. You can see all the gentlemen here, all the pants and shirts. See some of the boys that would have helped you in the background, maybe some of the salesmen right here. And this gentleman in his white pants and tall white top hat. You can tell he's a man with money, and this eager clerk is probably excited to get his commission. This is the view of the outside of the building. This is the Kirchner building on Main Street in Poughkeepsie. It still stands today. It currently stands vacant. It's all boarded up today and is in a little bit of sad shape. This stereo view was published by the crockery store on the bottom right of this image. I do want to say that this building has been purchased recently, and I believe it is going to be restored on Main Street in Poughkeepsie. I believe he is also going to be trying to restore the cornice of this building. I was working with the Dutchess County Historical Society, and they were looking for an image of this exact cornice, and luckily we have a stereo view here to help restore this building to what it was. You can see there's a little statue right here. A man that is restoring the building actually visited the statue. A woman saved it from being torn down with the rest of the cornice and has it in her own personal collection. So at least you'll be able to replicate it, hopefully. But just one other thing I want to point out about this is that this is really a change in Poughkeepsie. You have these kind of older buildings next door to it that are being torn down and replaced by these larger buildings on Main Street. What we see today with all of these rows of 3 or 4 story buildings really came around in the 1870s and changed kind of the feel of Main Street from being a very smaller early 1800s to growing to be the golden age of Poughkeepsie so far. Here's a close-up of the storefronts. The Leeson Holdridge Crockery, who has said actually published this stereo view probably as an advertisement for the store. And here's the Crosby men's store that we just saw the interior of. Here you can see a little tiny boy's suit in the window. I always like to blow up these images and kind of take a peek at inside of these windows. Now, not every stereo view is as clear as the other ones. As I said, these are 150-year-old photographs. They degrade over time. If they're left out to the light, they can fade. So this took me a lot of efforts to really bring out this image. It's a very faded image. It's a view of 333 Main Street, the Donaldson, Converse, and Maynard store, which was a department store at the time. You can see there's some hosiery here, women's clothing, and these are probably all the salesmen that were inside. A little bit light, but it's interesting to see these early storefronts, and I didn't want to not show you guys. This is another one that I blew up. This is right across the street at 332 and 334 Main Street. It's the Lucky Platt and Company. This is the earliest photograph I've ever found of the department store. Of course, this would grow and become the largest department store in the area, and would move out of these smaller accommodations and build their really large giant store that sits at the Main Street and I want to say Catherine Street in the city of Poughkeepsie. But here's its more humble beginnings as a dry goods store. And here you can see they're advertising some of the carpets that they have for sale. This is a view of Main Street and Washington Street in the city of Poughkeepsie. This is the beautiful Young Men's Christian Association, so the YMCA building, with the insurance company probably on the second floor and the Christian Association on the upper floors. See the Board of Trade sign here on the corner, and there's a nice general store here in the center of it. Today, this is all gone. You can even see this colonial building over here on the right, and this is where the Civic Center building is today. For me, I like this image a little bit better. Just a little bit of more of a close-up of these signs. One thing that makes this very valuable stereo view, other than it being a very early view of Poughkeepsie, is right here is this actually tobacco cigar store Indian. It's a very early version of it. Seems like a very crude example of one, but people actually collect this, early views of cigar store Indians. And this is one of the earliest I've seen. Moving on to village life, this is a view of Amenia over in the eastern portion of our county. It's just one of the houses in the village. You can see these early rock stone walls that really are indicative of early Dutchess County. You can see even some of the stockade fence in the background delineating different people's farmland. Owner right here with her horse and buggy. It's another view of Amenia, another house in the village. You see so many of these types of houses in Dutchess County, sometimes with eyebrow windows, but it's really nice to see one, in such crisp shape, closer to when it was built. You can see the gentleman here in his very tall, Abraham Lincoln style top hat, and his wife over here in what looks like maybe a beehive, or maybe where they keep the chickens. It's a really nice early view of a colonial era house. This view I've had for a very long time. I couldn't figure out where it was until I was able to blow it up. This is actually the hamlet of Bengal in central Dutchess County. It's a very hard view to find. You can see the general store right here in the middle. This is the old hotel that was torn down. Bullis Hall would be here behind these trees. You can't see them. This is the old Methodist church that also no longer stands. But what I just really wanted to show with this stereo view is how compact these hamlets and villages were. They weren't, the sprawl with all the houses dotting all of the roads. Everyone, unless you were a farmer living out in the country, everyone was centered around the center of the village. It's just a really interesting view showing only maybe 20 or so buildings in the hamlet of Bengal. So just like a really early image, even before the railroad came through. Just want to point out here, this building here, this is the post office. And this is still the post office today. It's really great if you're ever up in Bengal to check out the old post office. Moving on to Pleasant Valley. This is a view, of course, of the mill that was in the center of Pleasant Valley up until the mid-90s. I remember it myself as a little kid. The beautiful covered bridge that went over the Wappingers Creek, and some of these colonial homes that lined the creek side. Just a really interesting view of Pleasant Valley. Again, everything is centered in this valley. Everyone lived close together. You don't see houses lining the top of these hills or anything like that. Of course, having a covered bridge like this was very prone to floods, and was replaced by, the more modern bridge we see today. Cool to see it in this winter scene. Doesn't look like the factory's well insulated, as all the snow has melted off the roof. This is another view of a house in Pleasant Valley on Route 44. This house still stands. This is actually, I think, Creek Road over here on the left, with Route 44 going in the foreground. This house has been very altered today. I think it's been cut up into apartments. The only thing that really indicates that this house is this rectangular window that still stands. But still interesting to see this farmhouse, the gas street light on the corner, and then all the barns you can see in the background to store hay, and of course for all the farm animals and everything. But just a nice view of a farmhouse in central Dutchess County. And it's just a cool kind of house too, with all the ornamentation on it. Moving on to, this is Salt Point. This is the railroad station in Salt Point. I believe this is the Poughkeepsie and Eastern that went out to Salt Point. You can see the railroad crossing. I'll give you a little bit of a closer look at it. You can see the railroad signal here that would be lit by hand, most likely an oil lamp. And you can see the early locomotive and people waiting to catch the train. And you just look at some of these tracks, and this is how the early railroad started. It looks, a little bit rickety, a little bit, fragile for my taste to really be on a train at the time. Of course, rail accidents were very common. But just an amazing view of a railroad station in the 1870s. There's a village life in Wappingers Falls. This is looking up the creek. You can hear the stone bridge here. Of course, Wappingers Falls in front of it. See the old factory building. It might even be abandoned by this time. By the time postcards come around, this is a kind of a hollow shell of a building. You can see some of the houses and some of their gardens in the back here as well. Another view of the new fire wagon in Wappingers, gleaming, probably bronze in color and gleaming in the sunlight. I can see it takes a 4-horse team. This might have either been a Garner firehouse or the Johnson. I believe it's the Johnson that was on the Channingville side of the creek. But something really to impress everyone is your brand new shiny steam pumper, which is what this would have been. This is a view a little bit outside of town. I believe this is Hewsonville hamlet going south towards Beacon. This is where the pink nesting doll shop is today. I think this is close to Middlebush Road. And you can see the early wood bridge here, the boy standing on it. And what really impresses me is just this, how they built these rock walls to push back this hill so it doesn't erode into the creek. But just an interesting view. Moving into downtown Wappingers Falls, this is looking from the bridge, looking up the hill. You can see this is Mizzier Park in the background with this giant American flag, which you see a lot of these early photographs. You can see the Smith building over here. The pharmacy building right here in the center, which collapsed, I believe, in about 10 years ago. This would have been the bank building on the far left, Sweet Ore overall factory here, and the other storefronts here on East Main Street. This is a view of Wappingers Falls in 1860. I just want to point out a few things. This is the Eagle Stove Company. This is what they make, cast iron stove. This would catch on fire and burn most of this area of Wappingers. This is where Grinnell Library first started, on the second floor of this colonial building. Of course, it would move to where Eagle Stoves would clear out some land for everyone when the place burns down. And the only buildings that really stand today is, of course, the Zion Church, which is over here in the top right corner of the image. This house on East Main, and this building here, which I believe is now a wine shop. The bridge actually comes up and meets with this. This is the old bridge that was replaced in the 1870s or 1880s. This is the Franklindale Mill on the bottom right. That would be ruins in the next 20 years. Moving on to Glenham. Now, you might not know where Glenham is. Glenham is a small hamlet in between Fishkill and Beacon. It was a very big factory town, much smaller now, much quieter. 52 kind of goes around it, so the state road doesn't go right through the hamlet. And it's just a sleepy corner of southeast Dutchess County now. Here's a view of the little girls going to the church. I don't know if this is a wedding or maybe Easter. You can see white veils all in a row behind them as well. Interesting image. They didn't give many information about what this scene represented other than it was in Glenham. You can see here a woman with a large hood as well. This is an interesting image, but it shows you some of the little tykes of the hamlet. This is the Glenham store. Now, this was the most fashionable store in the area. People from the village of Fishkill or the part of Beacon called Matawan would come here and shop. It was kind of like the large department store of the area. They had over a dozen clerks inside helping customers, so it was a very busy place. Here it is again. You can see a little bit closer. It's not too sharp of an image. You can see all the different people. These are probably all the salesmen from the inside. Kind of get a peek of what is in these windows. Looks like some curtains or fabric and some small items over here. But this would be torn down when Texaco came in, which really changed the character of the hamlet of Glenham. This is the post office in Glenham. It was supposedly, I'm saying, the smallest post office in the country. You can see it's only about 10 feet wide over here at this large window. You can see the old couple that ran the post office. He looks like an older gentleman. So if this is from the 1870s and he is maybe 70 years old, if not older in this photograph, he was born probably in the colonial era, which is interesting. Of course, at the time, who knows, these two could be two 25-year-olds and you just aged differently back then, so who knows? But they look older to me. Here's a view of village life in Beacon. I know I'm taking a little bit of a long time. I only have one more section after this. This is a bird's eye view of Beacon. taken from Mount Beacon. You can see the river in the background with Newburgh in the distance. This would be DePoyster Avenue. You can see the cemetery that's off of DePoyster. Washington Avenue goes across the screen here. You can see the old Union School. Here you can see the old Presbyterian Church, which is a high Gothic church. And over here would be Main Street. You can see the curve of Main Street right here before it comes over the bridge. Here is the bridge, and East Main would come down to your bottom left. It's another view taken at another perspective. So our last perspective was over here on the mountain, and now we're looking from the creek, from the old factory, file factory. You can see the old high Gothic church over here that's still standing. This would be Leonard Street in Beacon. Going down this way, you can see some of the houses that still stand today. This would be Liberty Street going back here, and East Main Street going up the hill. So you can see how small Beacon was at the time, how concentrated it was off of East Main Street and along the creek. You can have all these hills in the background that are all aligned with houses today. There's more of a close-up of some of these houses. You can take a peek at some of these early colonial houses here. Some of them still stand, but of course are altered, and it's hard to distinguish which of these still stand, which don't today. But you can also see the difference between Beacon. This is what they would call the upper ledge of Beacon. This is where the fancy people lived in Matawan. And then you have the lower ledge down here, which was more factory workers. I live in a house today in the lower ledge, so not as fancy as these upper ledge people up here. This is a view of Prospect Street looking up East Main Street. So East Main Street going up and Prospect Street going over here onto the right. You can see again these early colonial houses in Beacon. These still stand, although altered, but just after a big blizzard. So the photographer wanted to get out and kind of show what life was like after a blizzard here in Beacon. Just another view. This is a First Street on the other side of the creek. Some of the earliest houses here in Beacon were built along First Street. So these are some of the older houses in the village of Matawan that became Beacon. Again, another blizzard day. You can see kind of the path somebody made down the middle, and this person stuck here in a snowbank. And these are some falls. I wanted to include it to kind of show these gentlemen in their attire. These are the Milzinga Falls outside of Beacon. But if you look at this guy's beautiful shoes, he's wearing this, plaid suit with his walking cane, and this man with his suit and shoes. It doesn't seem like something that you would really want to be hiking up a rock face with, especially a slippery one next to a water fountain. But I will admit these guys look pretty cool, so I shouldn't say anything. Just another view of this would be Bank Square. This is one of the earliest photos. This is a CDV that I was talking about before. You can see the William Teller Company over here on the left, and you can see his chemical laboratory pharmacy over here. We're just about going to a pharmacy and thinking of it as a chemical laboratory, but it's just what it is. This is actually an advertising card for Woodcock's Gallery. This is his gallery up here on the second floor. You can see some of his pictures advertised downstairs showing some of his work. And of course, again, the horse fountain, giving a drink of water to the passing horses. Another general store in Beacon. This is more in the Fishkill Landing side of town. Here's a close-up of these kids over here on the left. You can see they're barefoot, the two boys, which is very common at the time. And here they're selling some potatoes and things in baskets. Okay, now we're going for industry. This is the last section of, I'm going to run through this so I don't hold up anybody else too much longer. This is the Beacon waterfront. This is Long Dock. This is the railroad dock that brought railroad trains across the river. Of course, at this time, we didn't have the Poughkeepsie train bridge to bring goods across the river. So we had to rely on these railroad ferries that would bring it across the Hudson. Here you can see the roundhouse over here. And this is what is today Long Dock Park in Beacon. I believe only this building over here still stands, the Hammond Slugshot building. And a lot of these were old colonial dock buildings, the first early dock in Beacon. So this is all filled today. Doesn't look like this too much at all. But it's interesting to see what it used to look like. Of course, Newburgh in the background doesn't look like this at all either, with only a few of these churches still standing. But all of Water Street would be torn down for urban renewal. Almost none of this you see today. Almost all of this is gone, which is really a shame for Newburgh. Another close-up of Tyrunda Avenue here in Beacon, going up right here towards Main Street. You can see the old Howland Cultural Center is here. Here is our beautiful cantilever railroad station in Matawan. You can see how it is wider at the top and kind of tapers down. You would enter at street level here and then go down steps, and then here's the platform, one level below Main Street. Here's the first mill, or first hat factory mill. It was built in the early 1800s. It was only recently torn down. I was actually walking by when they tore it down in I believe it was like 2015 or something like that. So very recently. This is the oldest factory building in Beacon. It's a shame we lost it. This is taken from, again, at First Street with these old colonial houses here. This is not a stereo view or a CDV, but I wanted to show it again to show how concentrated Beacon was at the time. Remember that high Gothic church I kept pointing out? Well, this is the Greek Revival church that preceded it. You see a much smaller building. This is one of the earliest photographs of Beacon I've ever found. Robert Murphy, the former president of the Historical Society, helped me date it to be about 1867. So very, very early photograph of Beacon. But look how everything is just concentrated along East Main Street here. This is all full of houses today, all suburban housing today. It's really amazing. Even the house I live in here, which would be quite close to where these hills are, no longer exist. No one lived on the upper ledge in the 1860s. But again, I want to show you the Beacon factories here, the hat factories that began to expand. As a close-up of the Beacon Hat Factory building, this was the main factory building. It stood right on East Main Street. It no longer stands today. The building you see was built behind it. Today on East Main Street, where the Roundhouse complex is. You can see the old church bell here, which is now at the school down Liberty Street, still have it. This is one of the earliest factory buildings in town. Moving on to Glenham, this is the old Glenham Mills. They made Civil War, like the uniforms for the Union Army. It was also said that they made cannonballs for the Civil War as well. It lasted until about the early 1900s. And when you mostly see postcards of it, it is in ruins. So started in the early 1860s and was destroyed around, 1908, around then. Going further into the creek, you get to what is now the Groveville Mills. This is today the lofts at Beacon. This is another large carpet mills by the Stewart Company down in New York City. He had a big giant department store. He was one of the wealthiest merchants in New York City. And he decided to build these carpet mills here in Groveville. This is Route 52 going into Beacon. This is where all the car dealerships are. Sometimes you see these factory buildings off to your left going into Beacon. That's the old Groveville Mills. Today it's been fancy apartments. Close up of the creek and the Groveville waterfall here, which powered the plant. And another view of the plant here as well. See the main building here and with the tower. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of workers. They're probably all inside working hard. Of course, no air conditioning. You have all the large windows open to get some relief for this hot conditions. Also, the large windows came in handy to light up all the rooms so people can work easier. Moving up the county, we're in Wappingers now. I do not know what this factory is. I do not know where it was. I don't know what it made. The interesting thing is that I have an image of it, of Wappingers. This could also be in the Houstonville area. It looks like they might be on a small ditch here, not on a creek, but it's interesting to find a photograph of this, not know where it is. And, hopefully down the line, I'll find another reference to it or another photograph in it that will help me identify it. But I'm going to hold on to it for now, as I know it is Dutchess County, and it's just a little bit of a mystery that hopefully I'll be able to solve one day. Moving on to the bleachery in Wappingers, this was the main industry in Wappingers Falls. Here you can see on the right is the old part of the bleachery, the old factory buildings, and on the left, this is the new part. This is where the dye works were, dyeing the fabric on this left bank. This is about the 1880s. You can see the large standpipe going into the factory, coming from the falls, coming down to power the factory itself. Moving up into Poughkeepsie, you can see Kyle Rock here in the background. This is the Main Street landing for Poughkeepsie. You can see large, which look, it says it's the Visgard steamer, paddle boat steamer coming up the Hudson, docking at Main Street. Just a more view of the river. Of course, river industry was very big at the time. Factories were locating on the river. This white building right here is Vassar's Brewery. You can see it's a very large complex right here, right on the river. This is where he made his fortune to build Vassar College. Cow Rock, you can see here in the background where Henry Hudson first docked when he came to Poughkeepsie. This is a view from Buckeye Works looking south in Poughkeepsie. This is taken from the roof of the Buckeye factory. I posted this to my Hudson Valley Revisit the other day and got a lot of great information. I did a lot of research on it and realized I had some other images of it as well. This would later become Adrian's Platt factory. All of these buildings would be torn down, and this was a massive factory complex by the 1900s. Adrian's, of course, would make the library. Platt, of course, would be part of Lucky Platt. There's just very institutionalized families in this area. And what they made were these. These were farm equipment. This is a CDV by Slee Brothers, one of the most popular photographers in Poughkeepsie at the time. You can see them demonstrating one of their new farm equipment pieces. And these would be manufactured and sent across the country, Midwest, even abroad. I've seen images of Adrian's plows out in Australia as well. So this was either an advertising piece, being like, look at this piece of farm equipment you need for your farm, or it was for a patent to show that this is the item that we would like to patent, and it would be held at the patent office. A really cool early image of one of the industries in Poughkeepsie. And of course, I just want to show you again, this is the railroad going south. This is probably where Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery is in the background. And this is where Shadows Complex is today, down here in the valley. And just to bring you all the way north, this is the Statsburg industry. This is the Bordenstein Iron Company. They were very famous for making ice tongs for the ice industry. Large tongs to grip a piece of ice and haul it off into either your ice box or to put into the big ice house. You can see the interesting wheel here on the top right, kind of an advertising piece. A lot of kids here. I'm not sure if they're visiting for the day, visiting their dads, or they had something to do in the factory, who knows. But this was the main industry in Statsburg at the time. Really before all the estates were built, this was what Statsburg was known for. Here's just an image of what they made. These are ice tongs. These are actually made by them. You can find them pretty easily here in Dutchess County. They're not very expensive. If you want a pair of ice tongs, you can get them easily for between $15 and $35. And they were made right here in this factory. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for listening to me go on and on. I know this was a little bit long. I apologize. I just want to give a special thanks to Bard College, Vassar, Poughkeepsie Public Library, James Becker with his beautiful collection, including this view right here. The Beacon Historical Society, Robert Murphy, who gave me a lot of information about Beacon, Dutchess County Historical Society, Rhinebeck, of course, the author and historian Tony Musso, which I got a lot of information from his past articles in the Poughkeepsie Journal. And this last image I just want to show you, this is actually the Hudson River State Hospital just after it was finished being completed. This is before the Kirkbride main administration building was built. This is like one of the earliest images of the Hudson River State Hospital I've ever seen. You can see all the pipes that they would be put to put city water into the area. But just a beautifully designed building that of course is being torn down today. But it's interesting to see, one of the earliest images and how proud they were of this, large institution, larger than even Vassar College at the time. So thank you very much, everyone. And I await your questions.
Thank you so much, David. I think, Jeff, I don't know whether you've been receiving any questions on the, whether there are any hands up or any questions coming in.
I have not received any via the chat. So just a reminder to everyone, if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you can use the raise hand function under reactions, or if you have your camera on, just wave your hand on your camera. We can call on you and you can unmute your phone, unmute your mic and ask a question.
Meanwhile, as we're waiting for any possible questions, David, I am just amazed. Your knowledge of the geography of Dutchess County and your ability to pinpoint in these stereo images, particular intersections and to compare them to locations today is wow. I'm amazed. Regarding the community that I'm familiar with in Rhinebeck, you showed. I am not familiar with the house that you showed behind the picket fence there that had a two-story building with a widow's walk up on top.
Yeah.
I'll have to go back and compare some images that we have of.
I think somebody
similar
might have
kinds.
said it was a hospital as well. I'm not exactly sure. I think that's, it's very hard to date something from the 1870s and really bring it 150 years and, figure out what it is today.
Yeah, it's a possibility that occurred to me on Livingston Street, on the north side of Livingston Street, is the original Thompson House. And that may be that site. I'm not sure. Regarding your photograph, I stereo view of the Rhinebeck Hotel, today's Beekman Arms, that is also a really remarkable image. I mean, what's most remarkable is that the lawn that we associate with the Beekman Arms today did not exist back then.
Yeah, it was a street. It was the middle of the street.
That we were, there was no lawn because they needed it for parking for the horses, because you can see the horizontal beams. The beams there are in order to be able to tie up your horse. And people who would have gotten off, tied the horse there or horses, if they were pulling a carriage. And that's why it was set up that way. And
probably why the garden is so lush today from all the horses, being parked there for so long. Gave a lot of fertilizer for the gardens today.
Yeah.
Just an amazing portal into the life that occurred into this region some time ago, David. Thank you so much. And we have a question from Deborah. Deborah's asking, will this be shown again since it's being recorded?
Oh, well, yeah, it will be on YouTube, right? So if you go to the Rhinebeck Historical Society, I believe they'll have it up on their site.
Yeah, David Miller and Jeff, who just spoke, will be working together to edit this and to post it on YouTube. We won't get me mumbling at the beginning there, but the bulk of your presentation will be there on YouTube, and it may take a little bit of time to get it all edited, but we do that with all of our programs. There are currently 96 of them that are available. If you go to rhinebeckhistoricalsociety.org, there is a link to each of our videos there, or you can go to YouTube and write in Rhinebeck Historical Society, and we have a YouTube account that we use to post all of our videos. We also have a comment from Cynthia. Cynthia says, thank you so much. Very interesting. And John Vincent, I saw you just put a heart up. Was there something you wanted to say, John? No, he's giving a thumbs up.
Well, David, this was just absolutely, it's the oldest pictures I've ever seen of the county. And this is a treasure. You have the treasure of history of the county, and we appreciate so much you sharing it with us. And I hope to have the video up by Sunday. I'll send out announcements to everybody and post it everywhere once I have it out. But we should give David a round of applause, because this was just
everyone. Everyone, feel free to unmute yourself, everyone, and thank David.
There are some comments in the chat box. Let's see, from Chester, the early industrial revolution in New England, due to, I'm having difficulty reading them here.
But we did steal a lot of stuff of the English to start our own industrial revolution. Theirs started before ours, so we got a lot of their ideas and brought them over here for our own.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to point out to everyone, I'm sorry to keep you so long, I couldn't show this in the presentation. I actually have one of the earliest stereo viewers that Brewster made in the 1850s. Beautiful, made out of this pearl wood. And it almost looks like when you wear it, it almost
Wow.
looks like these VR glasses that you have today. But it opens up with these little buttons, and it shows you kind of how it works. You can see the bend in the glass to show the different perspectives. It's just a really interesting piece. I forgot I had it actually, but you can see the inside of it here as well. Just let's light in. You can see the lenses in the back, the mirror that reflected the light. I forgot I had it until today, and I was like, oh, I should show this early stereo viewer from
I
the
see,
Brewster
I
Company.
see, Drew, I see that you've raised your hand. Would you like to unmute and ask a question or make a comment? Guess not. Mary Beth has also said thank you for this presentation, David.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I really enjoyed sharing these images. I was amazed when I got them. Just to have one of these images that are this old is great. But when you come across a whole collection of it, it's mind blowing. These are the earliest images of the county, and to find so many in great condition, and I'm just happy to share it with everybody. It gives you a new appreciation. Postcards give me a good appreciation of the history of the county, but when you take it back another 40, 50 years, it's just amazing what this area looked like and how small it was and how compact everything was and how less suburban everything was.
I still see a raised hand by Drew. Drew, did you want to unmute yourself? And Jeff, are you able to unmute her?
I can ask to unmute. In fact, Drew looks like
All right.
There we are.
Hey, there we
All
go.
right. Yeah, I just wanted to say I was born in Rhinebeck, and spent a little input here from the canine set. And I spent most of my growing up years in Pleasant Valley. I live in Washington State now, but this was just such a treat. I loved seeing these old pictures. So thank you very much, David.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and on behalf of the Rhinebeck Historical Society, we want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We want to wish you all a wonderful holiday and a very happy and safe New Year. We'll see you with our program.
David, I think we do have still some other comments. Thomas Lepre, can we unmute Thomas? He seems.
Thomas, do you know how to unmute yourself?
He's saying that he can't do so, that the host has to unmute him.
No, hold on.
I'm also happy to do these presentations on Zoom. I've done all of them so far for Rhinebeck on Zoom. It's just one of the best ways to show these images too. You can be close to your computer screen and really get all the details. So I know people don't like these COVID restrictions, but they work out well for this type of presentation.
Thomas, typically on the lower left-hand side where your microphone is, if you click on that, it will unmute it.
It looks like he's got it.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, Thomas, go ahead.
Great. Hi, just wanted to say how much I enjoyed the presentation. And those, you're right, there are those are probably some of the oldest views I've ever seen, especially of the Beacon area. Something we usually don't see a lot of. Usually Poughkeepsie is the focus of a lot of these presentations, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, I should give out some shout outs to the photographers like Palmer in Newburgh that took a lot of photographs of Beacon, Wilcox, of course, Slee Brothers in Poughkeepsie, Vale in Poughkeepsie. These were really the early photographers that took these stereo views. And I don't think it was cheap. I don't think they made a lot of money doing it. But boy, did they really preserve some history and really give us a better insight into the county.
So this
Oh,
will be
yes.
available from Rhinebeck Historical Society?
Excuse me?
This will be available from the
Yes.
and do you give these presentations at any time again for other organizations?
Yeah, sometimes I do. Of course, having a big wealth of history from the county, I always try to work with different historical societies. You can follow me on Facebook at Hudson Valley Revisited. I post a lot of early photographs of the county there. You can follow me there, and I give I don't know, updates, and I'll let you know of future presentations that I give.
Yes, I could see that being a great presentation for some of our other organizations too. Thank you.
Oh, great.
There's one or two other people that say they might not be able to unmute themselves. Remember, look typically on the lower left corner of your screen, there'll be a little microphone icon. And if you click on that, you should be able to unmute yourself. So we have an interesting comment, David, from Cynthia. Cynthia says, my grandmother went to Eastman College. Thanks for the
Oh, wow.
pictures.
I didn't know that they actually allowed women into the college. Well, all the photographs that I have from the 1870s was mostly men, which I think was pretty typical for colleges at that time. But I'm happy that they accepted women before they closed as well. Nice.
And
something new.
Cynthia says, I love the Zoom presentation because I'm in college. And she says her grandmother was born about 1900.
Nice.
Okay. I think, David, what impressed me, what sticks with me was your ability to focus. It wasn't just the stereo views, but taking details from those, like the cigar store Indian that you were looking at in one of those views from Poughkeepsie, the steps in that view of Red Hook on where we now have Route 9 going north of Poughkeepsie. Then it was a dirt road with stone wall on either side, and you were able to pick out those wooden steps that go up across, allow you to cross the stone wall without damaging the stone wall. And your ID of buildings in Bengal, who knew that we had a picture that you have a picture of the post office that goes back that far. I mean, that kind of detail is just remarkable.
I was going to do some like then and now images as well, but it already took me an hour and 15 minutes to get through this presentation. If I added anything else, I already had to edit out a bunch of stuff. We would have been here all night. So
you clearly, I'm
sorry.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I've redone the setting to make sure anyone that wants to unmute themselves can. So if you tried before and you weren't able and you want to say something, try it now. Unmute yourselves and join the conversation.
Okay. I don't know if we've got anybody else or not. If not, on behalf of the Historical Society, on behalf of the whole county, thank you so much for an absolutely wonderful presentation and a great Friday evening for all of us.
I'm glad
Good night,
everybody. Good night.
Thank you very much.